If you can hear this, I need you to know something. What happened today isn't on the news anymore. It's not trending online. The networks are silent, and the only way anyone's talking now is over channels like this one. So if my voice sounds shaky, it's because I'm not a reporter, not a soldier, not anyone who ever imagined doing this. My name is Ethan Hale. I'm 29 years old. I live in Dayton, Ohio, and until this morning I worked a forklift at the Ryder Distribution Center off Needmore Road. Tonight, that job doesn't exist anymore. None of this feels real, but it is. I woke up just before 7 to the sound of helicopters. Not medevac choppers, not traffic news birds. These were heavier, deeper, military-grade rotors that made the apartment windows hum. At first, I thought there had been an accident on I-75, or maybe a hazmat situation at Wright-Patterson. I turned on my phone, but by then the Verizon network was already gone. AT&T was down too. Only emergency calls only, flashing at the top. I checked the weather band, and that's when I caught the first fragments of a federal broadcast. Calm, rehearsed voice. No emotion. Deployment of the National Security Response Force to Tier 2 stabilization zones is underway. That was it. No explanation of why Dayton was one of those zones, no details, no instructions. Just those words. I didn't know what Tier 2 meant yet, but the way the guy's tone dipped on the word stabilization, it sounded like control. When I stepped outside, the entire street was buzzing. Neighbors standing on porches with mugs in hand, trying to figure out if anyone knew more than anyone else. Old Mr. Richards from 3 doors down had his handheld scanner pressed to his ear, and I caught him muttering something about Right Pat going into lockdown before 9. The traffic lights were already dead. No hum, no glow. Just empty intersections and a faint smell of exhaust in the air where cars had stalled out when the lights went down. I tried calling my supervisor, Frank Dole, to see if the warehouse was shut down. Straight to voicemail. Then Luis Ortega, one of our night shift loaders, texted me from a burner app. 3 words. Don't come in. I drove in anyway. The city felt wrong. Downtown was still waking up, but the streets were nearly empty for a weekday morning. When I crossed North Dixie, I saw the first checkpoint. 2 Montgomery County cruisers angled across the road, lights flashing, and behind them sat 3 matte black MRAPs. No insignias, no license plates. The men standing around them weren't cops, weren't guard, and they definitely weren't there to answer questions. Tan combat uniforms, plate carriers, no patches identifying units, SCAR-L rifles slung at their sides. A man with a headset scanned passing cars with a thermal monocular. They waved one truck through, but the next guy who tried to cut around got pulled out and zip-tied on the pavement. I parked 3 blocks away and walked. That's when I spotted Luis, crouched behind a dumpster behind the Aldi on Wagner Ford Road, clutching a Baofeng UV5R like it was gold. He waved me over and whispered, "They're raiding the warehouse." I thought he was joking, but his face said otherwise. He told me the NSRF claimed we were hoarding controlled inventory. That's what they called it, but we weren't hoarding anything illegal, just batteries, water filters, and pallets of insulin packs we pooled money together for, because the shelves have been half empty for months. Families relied on that stuff. Luis said they loaded it into unmarked trucks and drove it out. Then his voice cracked when he told me they arrested Miller, our shift lead, after he refused to unlock the south cage. Then I heard the gunfire. It was sharp, fast, and close. 6, maybe 7 shots, echoed against the concrete walls. I couldn't see where they came from, but people started screaming inside the facility. A forklift slammed into a fence as someone bailed out. Luis grabbed my sleeve and dragged me behind a parked semi. Then we heard it, a mechanical buzzing overhead. 2 quadcopter drones drifted into view, black carbon frames, underbelly thermal scanners, red strobing nav lights. We ran. No plan, just instinct. By the time we ducked under the I-75 overpass, both drones had passed north. I kept expecting someone to shout for us to freeze, but all I heard were sirens growing somewhere behind us. We made it to Luis's cousin's apartment in 5 Oaks by 10:30. Inside, the power was still out. Every TV black, Every router dead. Luis pulled out his Baofeng again and started flipping through bands until he landed on unencrypted chatter coming from a channel somewhere downtown. That's when we learned about the first clash. At exactly 9:40, a convoy of NSRF vehicles rolled up to a community food depot on 5th Street, one of the last places in the city distributing free canned goods and bottled water after rationing started last month. Volunteers barricaded the lot with delivery trucks and concrete planters. The standoff lasted less than an hour before someone opened fire. Nobody knows who fired the first shot, but at least a dozen people got hit when it was over. By noon, the rumors exploded. Social media platforms dropped completely offline around 11, locked under what FCC scanners later called temporary communications security protocols. Whole sections of Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky were off the grid by lunchtime. The only working voice came through AM out of Cincinnati. The official statement said, "By authority of the Emergency Stability Act, enacted at 0700 hours, curfew and transit restrictions are effective immediately across the states of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, and Michigan. All public gatherings exceeding 5 individuals are strictly prohibited. Citizens found in violation of these restrictions may face indefinite detainment under Section 12 of the Act." Indefinite detainment. That's the phrase that stuck. I called my mom on her old copper landline, one of the few things still working. She lives down in Kettering, a retired nurse, and I could hear the fear in her voice, even though she tried to keep it steady. She said Wright-Patterson's been sealed since 10, and there are reports of armed personnel carriers moving along Colonel Glenn Highway toward the base gates. She begged me to stay put, said not to come downtown, not to get involved. I didn't have the heart to tell her. It was already too late for that. At 2 o'clock, Luis patched into a different channel. That's when I realized this wasn't just chatter. It was coordination. Frequencies were being used to move people, mark safe corridors, warn about drones. Somebody out there was organizing. When Luis showed me the sticky note taped to the back of his radio, scribbled with encryption keys and call signs, he asked me one question: "Are you in or out?" I didn't answer right away. I thought about my job, my apartment, the box of old bills sitting unpaid under my coffee table. Then I thought about Miller getting zip-tied, about the insulin pallets loaded into unmarked trucks while families begged for them, about the woman I saw at Kroger pounding her fists on locked doors because she couldn't get formula for her kid. I told him I was in. So here I am, sitting in a darkened third-floor apartment, hooked into an old transceiver Luis's cousin kept from his days as a ham operator, talking into a mic I barely know how to use. Outside, the city sounds different now. No traffic hum, no music, no life. Just an occasional siren, a distant helicopter, and sometimes bursts of automatic fire far off toward downtown. This isn't a protest anymore. This isn't politics. Whatever started today, it's bigger than us, and I don't think anyone can stop it now. If you're hearing me, keep your radios powered, keep your doors locked, and don't trust official broadcasts blindly. The NSRF just locked down the rail yards south of downtown, so avoid them if you're anywhere near Dayton. I'll stay on this frequency as long as the battery lasts. I don't know what tomorrow looks like, but I know one thing for sure. The first shots have already been fired. If you're still on this frequency, this is Ethan Hale in Dayton. If you're hearing me for the first time, I'm not a journalist. I'm not an activist. I was a forklift operator 12 hours ago. Tonight, I'm sitting in a third-floor apartment with 3 strangers I didn't know this morning, holding a cheap Baofeng handheld in one hand and speaking into a salvaged transceiver patched into a car battery. If my voice shakes, it's because the last 8 hours haven't felt real. But I'm starting to understand now. This isn't an outage, or a protest, or some temporary crackdown. Whatever's happening here is deliberate, and the rules we lived by yesterday don't exist anymore. The situation around downtown is changing by the hour. Since my last transmission, the NSRF locked down the entire Dayton rail yard district just south of Webster Street. The freight terminal there is critical. It connects cargo lines running from Chicago through Columbus and straight into the Appalachian Corridor. If you control those lines, you control food, fuel, and supply shipments for half the state. At 18:20 tonight, two convoys rolled in from I-70 with about a dozen armored transports, unmarked MRAPs, and a few Humvee-style rigs fitted with signal jammers on their roofs. I know this because Luis's cousin, Marco, has been running his scanner non-stop since we got here. He picked up bursts of digital telemetry from one of the NSRF's repeater drones, and their deployment grid lines up perfectly with the main freight lines. I watched him chart it out on a folded road atlas, like he's been waiting for this moment for years. Every direction we turn, the feds are positioning themselves on major logistics choke points. About 30 minutes ago, someone on an encrypted channel, Delta 17, announced an assembly point near the east lot of the rail yards. Marco says Delta's part of a courier network, volunteers moving supplies and families out of blocked neighborhoods. He asked if we wanted to join them. Luis didn't even hesitate. I did, but when Marco explained why, hesitation stopped being an option. They're not just securing the rail lines. They're seizing inventory. The NSRF started pulling entire containers off private carriers earlier this afternoon. Not just medical shipments or government property, but everything. Generators, spare parts, food pallets. Marco says once those containers get tagged, they're gone. No paperwork, no chain of custody, no chance they come back. We were sitting in Luis's cousin's living room when we heard the first heavy thud in the distance. The deep, percussive sound of flashbangs bouncing off asphalt somewhere near the highway interchanges. Someone else on the radio confirmed it. 2 trucks tried to ram a checkpoint west of Kiowa Street and didn't make it past the barricade. For the first time all day, I felt my stomach drop. Until now, it was mostly confusion and fear. Now, there are people deliberately fighting back. We grabbed what we had, 2 handheld radios, 3 packs of bottled water, and Marco's binder of frequency keys, and slipped out the back door just after 1900 hours. I tucked the transceiver into my backpack and kept my head down as we moved along back alleys toward Riverview Avenue. The air was thick with humidity and the faint tang of ozone, the kind that sticks around after nearby lightning, except there wasn't a storm. By the time we crossed over the bridge into the old industrial sector, the streets were mostly abandoned. Shuttered mechanics, chain-link yards, old breweries with faded paint, peeling off brick walls. The entire city looked like it was holding its breath. When we reached an overpass south of the freight yards, we stopped in the shadows and waited. Luis pulled his baofeng, tuned into Delta 17's channel, and turned the volume just low enough for us to hear. A calm voice on the other end was coordinating a staggered approach. Small groups moving in on foot to avoid drawing attention. No vehicles, unless absolutely necessary. Their goal was simple: get as many families and essential supplies out before the NSRF locked down the entire sector. That's when we heard the first burst of automatic fire echoing through the yards. It was distant at first, maybe 4 or 5 blocks east, but unmistakable. Controlled bursts, not random panic shooting. Over the channel, someone yelled that NSRF personnel were engaging near the shipping offices, and a dozen overlapping voices started shouting updates at once. Luis turned the volume back down, jaw tight, knuckles white around the radio. I caught Marco's expression in the glow of his scanner, and that was the first time I saw actual fear in his eyes. We waited there for almost 20 minutes, crouched behind a concrete barrier, listening to the shifting soundscape of gunfire, radio chatter, and the strange, metallic hum of signal jammers passing overhead. A small drone swept across the road at one point, barely 30 feet up, its underbelly scanner pulsing infrared like a heartbeat. We didn't move. Then a figure darted out from behind a burned-out truck, 3 lanes over, and waved us forward. Marco recognized the call sign from earlier, Delta 17. Her name was Aria Kim, mid-30s, former EMT, now running courier ops out of an old firehouse basement east of Linden Avenue. She wore a faded OD green jacket with reflective tape stripped off, and carried a battered radio clipped to her vest. When she spoke, her voice was steady but tired. The kind of voice you only get when you've spent weeks living on caffeine and adrenaline. Aria led us through a gap in the fencing into a storage yard where maybe 15 others were gathered, huddled behind stacked shipping containers spray-painted with hand-drawn numbers to track safe lanes. Some carried backpacks, others hauled oxygen tanks, IV kits, and portable generators. The air smelled faintly of diesel and burnt rubber. A small camp lantern in the center barely lit their faces, but enough to see they weren't trained soldiers. They were teachers, mechanics, office clerks, students. While Arya was explaining the evac plan, a loud crack split the air from somewhere nearby, one of the NSRF sonic crowd dispersers. Even from 3 blocks away, you feel the pressure vibrate in your chest, an invisible shove knocking balance out from under you. Everyone froze for a moment, waiting for the next sound. Then came shouting over the radio. One of the advanced scouts reported an armored MRAP moving in from the east lot, flanked by 2 drones and at least 8 NSRF ground personnel. Arya immediately ordered everyone into the shadows and whispered for families to move toward the drainage tunnels that feed into Wolf Creek, while supply runners stayed put until the second evac wave. We crouched in silence, the distant rumble of engines rolling closer, vibrating through the pavement. That's when everything around us erupted. A flash illuminated the edge of the lot, followed by a deafening crack as something exploded near the MRAP's front axle. It wasn't us! Some other group took the first shot. A chaotic roar followed, both sides returning fire almost instantly. Tracer rounds stitched across the low fog, cutting through shadows, clattering off metal containers. Arya grabbed her Motorola and barked into the mic, voice sharp. "Bravo team, cut south now. East sector's blown. Runners, move." We moved with them, staying low between stacked containers, ears ringing from the gunfire, boots splashing through puddles of oily rainwater. The street ahead was lit intermittently by the glow of fires in the distance, orange reflecting off the curved steel walls of the yard like some distorted sunset frozen in time. When we finally reached the drainage tunnels, maybe 8 families had already made it inside, led by another volunteer crew. The tunnels smelled like rust and algae, but the air felt cooler underground, and for the first time all night I could breathe without my chest locking up. Arya regrouped with us inside the tunnel mouth, flipping through a set of paper maps that looked older than I was. She explained the plan in clipped sentences. The tunnels connect under Wolf Creek, feeding into a service corridor beneath an abandoned bottling plant on the other side. If we make it there, there's another extraction point, where more couriers can take over, moving families deeper into the city's west side, 2 away from NSRF choke points. While she talked, Luis leaned against the damp wall, clutching his handheld so hard his knuckles looked bone white. I was still trying to wrap my head around the fact that 12 hours ago I was worried about bills, and now I was crawling under Dayton streets with rebel couriers, trying to evade federal drones. Before we moved deeper into the tunnels, Arya looked directly at me and said, "If you've got anyone still out there, get a message to them now. These lines could go dark any minute." I thought of my mom, sitting in her small house in Kettering, probably staring at the phone, waiting for me to call. I told Arya I didn't even know how I'd reach her if the networks were down. She just handed me a slip of paper with a different frequency handwritten on it and said, "If you can find a working transmitter, send 3 short bursts. Someone will hear you." I stuffed it into my pocket without saying anything. So that's where we are now. I'm back on the transmitter, crouched against damp tunnel concrete, trying to keep my voice steady while the sound of distant firefights echoes through the city above. The NSRF still controls the rail yards, but families are moving through the drainage system right now. And for the moment at least, they're making it out. If you're listening to this, keep your radios charged and your transmissions short. Avoid open streets near downtown. Stay away from Webster Street, the East Lot, and any visible convoys. If you hear drones overhead, find cover immediately. They're running thermal sweeps every 15 minutes now. I'll keep this frequency live as long as I can. Tonight isn't over, and whatever started here in Dayton isn't going to stay here for long. If you're hearing this, you're still on the Dayton frequency. This is Ethan Hale again. We're transmitting from below street level tonight, somewhere west of Wolf Creek. The last few hours have blurred together, so if I sound scattered, it's because I haven't slept, and I can still hear the hum of drones above us every time I close my eyes. The fighting around the rail yards hasn't stopped. If anything, it's getting worse. Marco's scanner keeps pulling chatter off unencrypted NSRF sidebands, and from what we've pieced together, They've fully locked down the entire Webster Street corridor and diverted all cargo traffic away from the east lot. Nobody's in or out without a military-grade passcode. And here's the part that has everyone worried. They didn't just secure the perimeter. They cut the power grid feeding 3 surrounding blocks and installed mobile signal suppression towers on top of their vehicles. That's why every LTE band went dead last night. That's why the city feels quiet in a way I can't explain. I keep thinking about what Dayton looks like above us right now. From what little we've heard, streetlights are out across half the downtown sector, and the few roads still lit are glowing under flood lamps mounted on NSRF trucks. Picture shadows where there shouldn't be shadows, blacked out apartments, and the occasional bright flare of muzzle flashes somewhere distant when another skirmish breaks out. We've been sitting in this tunnel for the past 2 hours while Arya coordinates with other courier groups. Her Motorola never stops crackling. Families are still moving through this section. Older couples, kids no older than 8 or 9, people hauling whatever they could carry in backpacks. Some didn't bring food. Others carried oxygen tanks for relatives. The plan was to stagger evac waves, so the NSRF drones wouldn't notice clusters of heat signatures in one place. But that plan nearly fell apart an hour ago when one of the aerial sweepers passed directly over the bottling plant exit. We killed every light, even the small LED markers taped to the walls, and pressed flat against damp concrete while the thing hovered above us. You can hear the low whine of its rotor assembly long before you see it. Marco says they're likely RQ-20 Puma variants, modified with enhanced infrared capability. Military stock, repurposed for urban sweeps. Its scanning cone must have missed us by sheer luck. Or maybe the rain in the upper storm drains distorted the heat readouts enough to hide our signatures. Either way, we got lucky. At roughly 0100 hours, Arya got confirmation over a secondary channel. NSRF has begun redirecting personnel toward the I-75 choke points north and south of Dayton. That highway isn't just local traffic. It's the main artery, connecting Cincinnati and Detroit through this region. Marco traced the pattern out on a map. And if what we think is correct, they're attempting to create a sealed corridor spanning nearly 70 miles. Anyone trying to leave Dayton by car tonight won't make it past Vandalia to the north or Miamisburg to the south. The few side roads that remain open are either flooded with abandoned cars or blocked by concrete Jersey barriers dropped off flatbeds. But here's the part nobody's reporting. We've started picking up transmissions from Cincinnati, Columbus, and Indianapolis. It isn't just Dayton anymore. At 23:40, a voice from Cincinnati, call sign Harbor 21, came over an encrypted band asking if any couriers could assist with extractions near the Ohio River bridges. About 20 minutes later, a Columbus relay confirmed their downtown sector is under direct NSRF lockdown. If all 3 cities are showing the same patterns, road close, power outages, asset seizures, road closures, this isn't a local operation. This is coordinated across multiple states. The mood down here shifted after that. Nobody's panicking exactly, but the silence is heavier now. People whisper instead of speaking. Kids are starting to cry more often, and every sound echoes strangely in the tunnels. I think everyone's realizing that this isn't going to be over in a day, or a week, or maybe even a month. Whatever this is, it's only getting bigger. Luis keeps pacing near the tunnel wall, holding his bow fang like he's waiting for an answer he knows won't come. He hasn't said it out loud, but I can tell he's thinking about his younger brother. He lives on the east side, closer to Huffman Avenue, and the NSRF locked that entire neighborhood down this afternoon. No comms, no movement. The only word we've had from that side of the city came from a stray signal we picked up earlier. Muffled, screaming over an open band before the feed cut completely. Nobody knows what happened. Around 0145, Arya pulled me aside. She says we need more operators. People willing to monitor alternate frequencies and relay messages to outlying neighborhoods that still have power. I told her I'm not a radio tech, and she said that's fine. She sat me down next to a field transceiver patched into a laptop powered by a deep cycle marine battery and started showing me the basics. How to tune the bands. How to log confirmed positions without transmitting more than 3 seconds at a time to avoid triangulation. How to run encryption through the software. which is a stripped-down version of FLDigi running in secure digital mode. I spent the next half hour listening to fragmented updates. A fuel depot burning near North Gettysburg Avenue. Reports of armored trucks setting up perimeter gates on Monument Avenue. A voice somewhere west of town, claiming an entire convoy got boxed in and captured after taking the wrong exit. Each update was chaotic, missing context. But the pieces start to connect in your head like some terrible puzzle you don't want to finish. By 2:30, Delta 17's network confirmed something unexpected. The NSRF is deploying ground-penetrating radar sweeps. Marco says they are likely trying to locate people moving underground through drainage tunnels like the one we're in. That explains why we've been forced to rotate evac waves instead of running everyone at once. If you're hearing this, and you're sheltering below street level, keep your groups small and avoid congregating around heat sources. The constant tension wears on you. I can feel it in the way people breathe down here. Every sound we make seems amplified. The walls drip condensation. The air smells faintly metallic. And you can hear the low rumble of the city above us. Distant engines. Somewhere a siren. And every so often the muted boom of something heavy being deployed. It feels less like we're hiding under Dayton and more like we've slipped into some parallel layer of the city where time stretches and every second matters. I wish I had better news, but there's one more thing I need to pass along. Marco intercepted what he believes is a partially scrambled NSRF transmission, routed through the same Cincinnati repeater we've been using. He filtered out the noise and isolated one phrase: containment, priority escalation, Tier 1 risk assessment. If that phrase means what we think it does, Dayton is no longer considered a stabilization zone. We're now a Tier 1 operational target. That shifts their rules of engagement completely. I don't know exactly what that means yet, but I know how Marco reacted when he heard it. He stopped talking, grabbed his jacket, and quietly started checking his gear. Luis looked at me like we were already in over our heads, before we even understood what we'd stepped into. Right now, Aria's debating whether to move this entire group deeper west, toward abandoned manufacturing corridors past Wolf Creek. There's less risk of detection there, but it puts us farther from potential extraction points and completely cuts us off from central supply caches. If the NSRF locks down the western arterial roads like they did downtown, we'll be boxed in with no fallback routes. That's the decision being made above my head while I sit here, talking into this transmitter, trying to pretend like my voice is steady. I wish I could tell you I know where this is going, but I don't. All I know is that the air smells like damp concrete and burned plastic, that my legs ache from crouching, and that somewhere outside this tunnel, armored vehicles are rolling through neighborhoods I used to drive past without thinking twice. I keep hearing the phrase, Aria said earlier, when the scanners went quiet for a moment, and everyone froze to listen. If Dayton falls, the rest of the corridor goes with it. She wasn't exaggerating. If you control Dayton, you control supply routes into 3 states. So here's what I know right now. The NSRF has locked down the Webster rail yards, northbound I-75, and multiple arterial highways leading into Dayton. Several courier teams are still operational, but running low on secure routes. Families are moving west through drainage tunnels as I speak, and NSRF drones are running sweeps every 15 minutes with enhanced thermal scanning. If you're near Dayton tonight, stay off the main roads. Keep your heat signature low. Use hand radios sparingly, and avoid broadcasting unless you absolutely need to. This isn't over, but tonight the balance has shifted, and not in our favor. I'll stay on this frequency until the battery runs dry, or until we move. If this signal goes silent, assume we've relocated further west. Stay alert, stay small, and keep listening. This is Ethan Hale, Dayton frequency, broadcasting just past 0600 hours. If you're listening and you've been tracking since last night, we made it through the dark, but I'm not sure how much longer we can stay underground. The air down here is damp and heavy, and the walls sweat condensation that soaks through your sleeves if you lean against them for too long. I haven't slept. None of us have. We've been rotating evac waves since around midnight, moving families west under Wolf Creek. But dawn's bringing a new problem. Drones don't need sunlight, but their operators do. With daylight rising, it's going to be harder to hide heat signatures when they switch from low-frequency infrared to visual sweeps. Arya was up the entire night relaying messages between courier teams. Around 0540, we caught our first intercept, confirming what everyone suspected. The NSRF brought in heavier assets overnight. They're not just locking down intersections anymore. They've deployed mobile comms units, small armored recon squads, and something called Patriot Package Alpha. Marco isolated the packet headers from an encrypted transmission, but that's all we know about it. Whatever it is, it came in with a convoy from Columbus at 3 in the morning, escorted by 6 MRAPs and 2 support trucks. When I asked Marco why this Patriot package mattered, he laid out the maps we've been updating all night. NSRF's deployment grid isn't random. They're forming layered enclosure rings around Dayton, one at the rail yards, one around the main arteries, and now another, cutting through suburban corridors toward Kettering, Oakwood, and Moraine. The circle's closing fast. We're inside it. Luis hasn't stopped pacing since he heard that. His little brother's last known location is in one of those new ring sectors, and the east side's been a blackout zone since yesterday. Every time someone on the network asks for confirmation about residents there, the line stays quiet. At 0610, a ripple of static cut across our band so hard I thought the transceiver blew. Marco killed the gain and switched antennas to the backup whip, but it wasn't us. It was a full-band pulse sweep, wideband disruption, designed to fry unshielded comms and force everyone off unsecured channels. We lost 3 relay stations instantly, including one linked to families moving north through Old North Dayton. For about 10 minutes, it was just static on every frequency, and all we could do was wait, holding our breath, knowing those people were mid-transit, with drones circling above them. When the band finally cleared, a courier unit identified as Delta 9 broke through long enough to say this: East Corridor compromised. Avoid Webster entirely. Do not approach Monument Avenue checkpoints. They are detaining without warrants. That was it before they dropped again. We made the call to push west. That wasn't unanimous. Arya wanted to stay coordinated with the remaining Delta teams near downtown, but Marco argued the NSRF's drone grid patterns were compressing tighter every hour. He pulled up a basic signal overlay on his laptop, and even I could see it. 2 converging cones of telemetry sweeping inward, forming a choke point over the rail yards and Webster. By the time daylight fully breaks, that sector's going to be a dead zone for anyone without secured clearance. We packed fast: laptops, handhelds, encrypted drives, and as many spare batteries as Marco could fit into a duffel bag. There wasn't time to move the last families, and that silence hung heavy when Arya said it out loud. We're leaving people behind. Not because anyone wants to, but because staying means being trapped. I volunteered to help carry the transceiver rig, partly because it keeps me busy, and partly because focusing on wiring keeps my hands from shaking. We killed our lanterns and started moving single file through the drainage system. Low voices. No lights, unless absolutely necessary. Surface noise carried differently down here. Above us, the city was waking, engines starting, sirens somewhere distant, the low, uneven thump of rotor wash as drones repositioned overhead. You could hear sharp cracks now and then, not rhythmic enough to be work crews, not chaotic enough to be panicked random gunfire. Controlled, disciplined bursts. By 0630, we reached a vertical access shaft under an old bottling plant and climbed a rusted ladder up into a narrow service corridor, lined with abandoned metal shelving. It smelled of dust and faint gasoline, and at the far end, a shattered window threw a slant of weak orange dawn light across the concrete floor. Arya pulled us into a huddle and laid out the plan. We moved 2 blocks west through back alleys. Avoid the main streets entirely. We reconnect with Delta 17 at a safe house near the old St. Adalbert school building. From there, reassess depending on NSRF movement patterns. Simple, in theory. In practice, nothing about this morning has been simple. The first block went smooth. Quiet, empty streets, broken glass crunching under boots, faded murals on brick walls washed out by years of sun and rain. But as we turned onto Forest Avenue, the silence broke hard. A single quadcopter came skimming low, maybe 20 feet above rooftops, its undercarriage lights pulsing soft blue. Marco whispered, "Scan pattern." and we froze against a chain-link fence overgrown with vines. The thing pivoted mid-air, sensor array swiveling, and for a solid 10 seconds I was convinced we'd been made. Then, as if on cue, a car alarm 3 streets over started wailing. The drone banked sharply, redirected, and disappeared behind a laundromat. Someone else triggered that alarm. Somewhere out there, another team's running interference, buying us seconds at a time. We moved again, faster this time, slipping into an alley behind a burned-out auto shop. That's where we linked up with Delta 17. 3 operators, all mid-30s, geared light, each carrying packs stuffed with medkits and signal boosters. Aria and Delta's lead, a guy named Kenneth Price, traded quick updates. He said NSRF had already locked down I-75 access completely. 2 MRAPs block the eastbound ramps, and an APC is parked at the Gettysburg intersection with crew-served optics scanning rooftops. That means the entire east-west corridor is cut off. More disturbing, he mentioned spotting small satellite relay trucks parked near the Deeds Point Metro Park footbridge. That likely explains why our lower bands have been intermittently dead since last night. They're deploying signal triangulation arrays to trace rogue frequencies. Kenneth didn't mince words. If you transmit longer than 4 seconds without encryption, assume they've got you tagged. Marco glanced at me when he said that, because we've been pushing longer bursts to warn families. The realization hits differently when someone says it out loud. By 0710, we reached the St. Adalbert Safe House, IS Ponza, or what's left of it. It's an old 2-story school building, boarded windows, doors chained shut, but the second floor has been converted into a temporary relay station. A pair of marine batteries sit wired into a salvaged inverter, feeding power to 2 laptops and a small repeater mounted on the roof. The inside smells like damp plaster and burned plastic. Piles of documents, maps, and printed manifests cover every desk. That's where I first saw the scale of it. The printed deployment grids, color-coded for every NSRF asset spotted in Dayton. Whole sectors, shaded black, where signal jamming is total. Red circles for confirmed arrests. Green triangles for safe zones. There aren't many green triangles left. Aria studied the map for a long time without saying a word. Luis leaned over her shoulder, searching for any sign of his brother's street. It isn't marked. Neither is most of the east side anymore. Before we could settle, a call came over the encrypted band. A group of civilians tried to break through a checkpoint near East 5th and were intercepted. A firefight erupted, and early reports claim at least 1 NSRF vehicle's disabled, but multiple injuries are confirmed on both sides. The voices on the radio weren't panicked. They were precise, clipped, efficient. Whatever's happening in the city right now isn't chaos. It's organized suppression against organized resistance. Kenneth made the call to start packing sensitive gear. We've got maybe an hour before this safe house becomes a target. And if the NSRF's triangulation arrays are operational, they already know the second floor here is running repeaters. We're relocating again before the sun fully clears the rooftops. So if you're hearing this, here's what I know right now. The NSRF has expanded their perimeter into western Dayton. Multiple families are still in transit underground, but drone sweeps are increasing in frequency and range. Mobile jammers are fully operational on north-south corridors, and heavy assets arrived overnight from Columbus under Patriot Package Alpha. Signal traces suggest Dayton's now part of a larger containment operation spanning multiple states. Stay underground where possible. Keep your transmissions short. If you're sheltering families, avoid congregating in large groups. If you one friend, their sensors are reading thermal clusters now. And whatever you do, don't trust cleared corridors without independent confirmation. We'll keep this band open until we move again. If you lose my signal, switch to the secondary frequency I mentioned last night and listen for 3 short bursts. This is Ethan Hale, Dayton frequency. Time is 0930 hours, local. If you've been with us since last night, you already know how fast things have escalated here. If you're just tuning in, I need you to understand. This isn't confined to one city anymore. What started as federal stabilization efforts in logistics hubs across Ohio has grown into something much larger. and if you're anywhere along the I-75 corridor, your world changed overnight. We made it out of the St. Adalbert relay point just before sunrise. The safe house is empty now, but it won't be for long. Marco says once the NSRF locks down this sector, they'll sweep every building with thermal imaging. They don't leave assets unsecured, not when they're deploying this much equipment into one place. Luis helped haul out the last of the marine batteries while Aria rerouted our emergency beacon to a fallback frequency. It's quiet in here now, but the silence doesn't feel safe, just temporary. Before we left, I managed to scan through some of the reports stacked on Kenneth's desk. Printed maps, intercepted comms, timestamps from multiple cities. Until this morning, I thought Dayton was the focal point. Now I know better. Here's what we've pieced together from open bands and encrypted relays. At 4:20, Indianapolis went dark. Whole sections of the downtown grid lost power, and within 10 minutes, both cellular and broadband services dropped. Volunteer operators monitoring frequencies out there reported at least 4 NSRF convoys moving south along I-65, blocking every major ingress into the city center. Call signs Foxtrot 9 and Iron Gate were both pulled from Indianapolis before comms went silent. By 5:15, Columbus sent an encrypted distress packet through Delta's northern relay stations. It warned of critical asset seizures near Rickenbacker International Airport. If you're unfamiliar with the area, that's a logistics hub moving thousands of tons of freight per day. Marco says the seizures weren't random. Based on timestamps, the NSRF secured every site in under 40 minutes, prioritizing fuel depots, grain silos, and medical storage facilities. And in Cincinnati, just after sunrise, another operator, call sign Harbor 21, confirmed gunfire near the Brent Spence Bridge crossing the Ohio River. That's Interstate 71 and I-75 southbound, and it connects directly into Kentucky. Harbor 21 reported unidentified opposition forces clashing with NSRF vehicles attempting to block bridge access. We don't know who those opposing forces are yet. Maybe organized couriers, maybe state guard units refusing compliance orders. Either way, the Brent Spence is now fully locked down. That's 3 major cities inside 6 hours. Here in Dayton, the consequences are rippling outward. There's no food distribution scheduled for today. Supply trucks haven't moved since yesterday morning, and what little is left in smaller markets is being bought out fast. Marco checked the chatter on private retail logistics nets, and one of the chains flagged Montgomery County as critical depletion risk within 48 hours. Once the shelves empty, desperation sets in. We're already seeing the first signs of that desperation around the outer neighborhoods. Overnight, 2 independent operators reported civilians confronting NSRF personnel on Hoover Avenue. No weapons, no violence, just shouting and demands for power restoration and food access. The response was tear gas. One of those operators, a woman identifying as Relay 4, said she watched 3 people collapse from exposure while drones circled overhead, warning crowds to disperse. Luis was listening when she said that. He didn't say anything, but I saw him looking at the tunnel entrance afterward, like he wanted to bolt straight into East Dayton, even knowing the roads are locked down. That's part of why I wanted to make this transmission longer than usual. We've spent most of the night focused on surviving block by block, moving families through tunnels, staying one step ahead of sweeps. But the bigger picture matters now. The situation we're in didn't come out of nowhere. It's been building for years, and I think people need to hear it spoken plainly. If you're outside the impact zone, you might not know this, but Dayton's been a logistics choke point for decades. The entire I-75 freight corridor runs straight through here, connecting the manufacturing backbone of the Midwest to southern ports and eastern highways. Ryder, XPO, DHL, FedEx, DHL, they all run massive distribution centers clustered within 10 miles of downtown. And for years, that dependency was invisible. Nobody thought about how fragile the supply chain was until the shortages started last winter. Prices doubled, then tripled. Food deserts expanded across half the county. When the first rationing measures hit in March, people thought it was temporary. But now we know those allocations weren't just economic policy. They were precursors to resource control zones. Marco explained it like this. Whoever controls the freight controls the flow of survival itself. That's why the NSRF came here first. You can feel the tension rising, even underground. The families in these tunnels aren't just afraid of federal forces. They're afraid of each other. I heard two men whispering in a side passage earlier, arguing whether to stay with the group or split off before daylight. One thought the couriers were deliberately steering people toward an ambush. The other said following the group is their only chance. That's how thin trust has become in just 24 hours. And above ground, things are shifting faster than we can track. Reports came in an hour ago that West 3rd Street has been completely barricaded with shipping containers dragged into place by heavy loaders. Someone out there is preparing for a prolonged defense. But we don't know if they're courier teams, organized civilians, or rogue state guard units operating independently of federal command. Delta 17's network is already stretched beyond capacity, trying to separate confirmed data from rumor. Arya's headset hasn't been silent once this morning. There's just too much traffic and not enough people to sift it. Around 0850, an intercepted packet from NSRF Command confirmed that Dayton, Columbus, Cincinnati, and Indianapolis have all been classified as Tier 1 operational zones. Marco says that's significant. Tier 1 designation means their engagement rules shift from stabilization to suppression. Whatever room for negotiation might have existed yesterday is gone now. We don't know exactly what Tier 1 suppression involves, but if the deployment patterns are any indication, it means we'll start seeing sustained aerial presence, heavier armored vehicles, and perimeter hard closures backed by live enforcement authority. In other words, if you're inside these cities without clearance, you're already considered a threat. Luis asked what that means for civilians. Nobody had an answer. I know this broadcast is heavier than usual, but you deserve honesty. These aren't isolated flashpoints anymore. Dayton's just one piece of a corridor spanning 6 states. Supply routes, energy hubs, data centers, all of it's contested now. For years, the country's been brittle under the surface, but this feels like the moment where everything starts breaking in the open. If you're listening in a smaller city or rural zone right now, you have advantages we don't. Roads are still open outside Tier 1 designations. If you haven't done so already, start stockpiling water, fuel, and basic food supplies. Secure communication tools if you can find them. Even a cheap handheld scanner like a Baofeng can keep you ahead of sweeps if you know where to listen. And most importantly, coordinate quietly with your neighbors. If the patterns we're seeing hold, what's happening in Dayton won't stay here. We're still in the tunnels under Wolf Creek, but not for much longer. Kenneth says another NSRF drone swarm is heading this direction, and the pattern suggests they're triangulating underground signatures now. That means moving west, deeper into industrial zones, where overhead line of sight is broken by collapsed roofs and heavier steel framing. It's riskier in some ways, but staying here guarantees discovery. Before we cut power and relocate, I need to leave you with this. Stay alert. The news feeds are silent for a reason. The blackout isn't about safety. It's about control. What you're hearing now comes from operators risking exposure to get fragments of information out before comms get wiped entirely. None of us know what tomorrow looks like, but the first thing to understand is that tomorrow won't look anything like yesterday. This is Ethan Hale, Dayton Frequency. Time is 1300 hours, local. If you're still hearing me, we made it out of the Wolf Creek tunnels about 2 hours ago. We're holed up now inside what used to be a parts distribution warehouse on Edwin C. Moses Boulevard, deep in the abandoned industrial district. I want to warn anyone using this frequency. The NSRF has shifted into full perimeter compression. Their drones are running sweeps every 10 minutes across all major arteries west of downtown, and the radius keeps tightening. The world feels different in daylight. Yesterday, under blackout skies and broken grids, you could almost trick yourself into believing the city was sleeping through all of this. Today, there's no pretending. The streets west of the Great Miami River are littered with burnt-out vehicles, shattered glass, and debris that wasn't there yesterday morning. Asphalt scorched in spots where drones hit non-lethal ordnance, though I've seen at least 3 burned-out shells of sedans where people clearly didn't get clear in time. We cut through a row of closed automotive shops to reach this warehouse, moving fast along alleys where collapsed overhangs block overhead visibility. You learn quickly which streets are safe by watching the shadows cast on the pavement. If you see them ripple, it means drones are circling overhead, and you need to disappear. Out here, the NSRF isn't the only concern anymore. Entire neighborhoods are fracturing. Groups are forming on every corner, some defensive, others predatory. Marco intercepted a call from a private handheld frequency around noon. Just static and fragments, but enough to catch the words gas, truck, and pull west now. Less than 20 minutes later, we passed a small group loading blue water jugs and propane tanks into a pickup behind a locked roll-up door. Their faces were hard, silent. Nobody waves, nobody calls out anymore. Everyone assumes everyone else is competition for dwindling supplies. Inside the warehouse, we've set up a temporary node for Delta 17's relay network. Aria's Motorola sits on one table, Marco's laptop and field transceiver on another. We've stretched cables across the dusty concrete floor, connected to a deep-cycle marine battery scavenged from an abandoned forklift outside. Our range is short, but it's enough to pick up chatter from Westside operators and pass along packet data through encrypted bursts. Luis is upstairs on lookout, lying on his stomach, near a shattered window with a borrowed monocular. Every time he spots an aerial sweep pattern shifting, he calls it out softly and updates Aria's map in pencil. Watching him work like that, I realize something I didn't yesterday. This isn't just survival anymore. This is adaptation. People are changing minute by minute out here. I want to talk about what the city feels like right now, because it's hard to explain unless you're here. Dayton doesn't sound like Dayton anymore. There's no constant hum of traffic, no planes lifting off from Wright-Patterson, no layered chatter from open storefronts. Instead, the air carries fragments of conflicting soundscapes, the low bass thrum of drones overhead, muffled shouting from streets we can't see, the occasional hollow boom of sonic dispersers shaking loose glass from upper floors. Everything else is silence, broken only by the clatter of pigeons startled off rooftops when something distant detonates. This isn't chaos. Not exactly. It's something heavier, like a city holding its breath while forces far bigger than us decide what's going to happen here. You can feel that weight on people's faces. When we passed an elderly couple on Alberta Street dragging suitcases, they didn't even look up when Luis asked where they were headed. One hand clutched a portable oxygen tank, the other dragged a half-collapsed roller bag. They weren't panicking, just moving with a kind of grim resignation. Just after 11, we intercepted a scrambled packet tagged Foxtrot 5 from Cincinnati. Marco decrypted enough to piece together fragments. NSRF assets massing along the Brent Spence approach, blocking southbound lanes entirely. Confirmed seizure of fuel tankers staged at Covington's depot. Civilian clashes reported near the Roebling suspension bridge. Origin unknown. Less than an hour later, a Columbus relay passed through an emergency update. Rickenbacker International has been fully militarized. Entire cargo warehouses are under NSRF control now, and a no-fly advisory has been extended to 40 nautical miles around the airport. The scale of this thing is widening by the hour. It's not Dayton. It's the entire I-75 corridor collapsing in real time. Aria thinks the objective isn't just securing infrastructure. It's controlling population movement, creating pressure pockets they can manipulate. If that's true, these choke points aren't temporary. They're permanent shifts in power over who moves, who trades, who eats. We're already seeing fragments of organized resistance trying to push back. An hour ago, we crossed paths with a crew calling themselves Red Line 6, 5 people armed with scavenged rifles, running supply escort out of a West Side grocery co-op turned ad hoc medical point. They weren't couriers like Aria's network, but they had discipline. A woman named Brenner briefed us quietly, said they'd set up spotters on the I-75 access ramps feeding Edwin Moses, tracking every vehicle crossing into their sector. Their intel matched ours. 2 MRAPs, 1 unmarked armored SUV, and at least 3 low-profile drones circling the highway choke point on rotation. Brenner also told us about something darker. A truck convoy, trying to break north along Germantown Pike, was stopped around 7 this morning. No one's heard from them since. Luis asked her if NSRF detained them. She shook her head and just said, "If they were detained, we'd know." This is something else. Arya doesn't want to speculate, but the uncertainty eats at everyone in the room. We're collecting scraps of information, intercepted pings, half-broken reports, visual confirmations from operators scattered across sectors. And even those pieces are fragile. Half the time, by the time we pass along something actionable, the situation's already changed. We've seen an uptick in NSRF drone patterns since noon. These aren't just quadcopters anymore. Marco identified at least 2 RQ-21 Blackjack UAVs holding station at mid-altitude above the West Side corridor. They're running persistent loiter patterns, likely coordinating ground units using real-time mapping overlays. That level of resource deployment isn't for crowd control. It's suppression-level tactics, meant to break any organized logistics chain before it takes root. And yet, people here keep trying anyway. Families keep moving west through broken alleys and empty industrial yards, looking for roads that haven't been barricaded yet. Some carry little more than duffel bags and canned food. Others haul rolling suitcases across gravel lots, pausing under bridges whenever the shadow of a drone cuts across their path. Inside this warehouse, we've started documenting reactions, not as reporters, but as a kind of memory archive. People need to know what this feels like, not just what's happening. One woman came in just before noon carrying a hand-painted sign that read, "We just want the lights back on." She and her husband run a laundromat 2 blocks from here. When the power grid collapsed last night, they tried calling their utility company, then the city hotline, then anyone. No answers anywhere. Then their food went bad. Then their water pressure dropped. She asked Arya if the couriers had a way to talk to whoever's in charge. Arya didn't answer, because there's no one to answer to anymore. The look on her face said she understood that before she even finished asking. We're watching trust erode between neighbors in real time. Marco says half the intercepted chatter overnight wasn't about resistance or survival planning. It was accusations. People reporting each other to the NSRF tip lines over food hoarding, hiding family members, keeping medical supplies out of reach. In one sector east of the river, someone even reported their own block captain for using a private generator. That's how fast the rules break down. One day you're barbecuing next to someone at a block party. The next, you're weighing whether they'll turn you in for keeping a few gallons of water hidden under your sink. And that, more than anything, is what scares me most about today. Before this ends, I need to leave you with what we know right now. Dayton West Side corridors are partially locked, but limited movement is still possible through industrial bypass routes. NSRF presence has intensified. Multiple armored vehicles stationed along Edwin Moses and 3rd Street corridors, backed by mid-altitude Blackjack drones providing real-time mapping overlays. Cincinnati, Columbus, and Indianapolis remain under partial blackout and active lockdown. Civilian groups are beginning to fracture, but localized courier networks like Delta 17 are still moving families where possible. If you're hearing this from outside the Tier 1 zone, prepare now. Stock water, fuel, and non-perishables while you still can. Establish communication trees with people you trust, and keep them off public networks. Avoid main interstates and watch for road closures before traveling anywhere near metropolitan areas. We'll transmit again once we establish a secure fallback relay west of the river. If you lose this frequency, switch to backup channel Sierra 39 and listen for 3 short bursts. This is Ethan Hale, Dayton frequency. Time is 1640 hours, local. We've relocated west again, deeper into the abandoned industrial grid past the edge of Edwin Moses Boulevard. We're in an old composites manufacturing facility now. Power long cut, windows shattered, pigeons nesting in the rafters. Dust clings to the back of your throat in here, but the thick concrete walls block drone scans, at least for now. I've been on this frequency since last night, passing updates, moving families, warning anyone still listening about sweeps and choke points. Until today, My world was maybe 6 square miles of Dayton concrete and underground drainage lines. But now, something's changed. Marco's laptop finally linked to an unsecured satellite relay, just long enough to pull fragments from external feeds, not domestic ones, but foreign reports broadcasting outside the continental blackout zones. It's the first window we've had into what the rest of the world sees. And if you thought this conflict was invisible beyond the I-75 corridor, it isn't. Everyone's watching now. From what we've pieced together, international reactions are split sharply into 3 camps. First, Europe. Multiple operators intercepted BBC relay packets around 1300 hours. And it sounds like European governments are still trying to stay neutral, at least publicly. A leaked German-language broadcast from Deutsche Welle suggested NATO members are deeply concerned, but holding back formal intervention talks. The word containment keeps showing up in their statements, which Marco thinks means they're worried about supply chain disruptions, not humanitarian consequences. That tracks with what we're seeing here on the ground. Most of Europe's imported freight from the U.S. East Coast comes through consolidated Midwest hubs: Cincinnati, Columbus, Chicago. Those hubs are compromised now. ARIA said DHL suspended 2/3 of its cargo transfers from the Dayton hub yesterday. If that ripple spreads through Ohio, Illinois, and Indiana, it could choke off hundreds of routes, moving food and pharmaceuticals out of the country. That alone explains why we're seeing pressure from across the Atlantic. The second camp is Asia Pacific, where the reaction is less measured. Around 1400 hours, Marco pulled down a partial Reuters translation, confirming that South Korea and Japan have called emergency cabinet sessions to discuss U.S. force deployments abroad. Both countries house significant U.S. military assets: Yokosuka Naval Base, Osan Air Base, Misawa, HSDC, and there's concern that any escalation here could trigger redeployments that leave allied Pacific regions underdefended. China's reaction is different. We caught an unencrypted China Global Television Network packet, translated into English. The domestic instability within the United States highlights the structural failures of federal governance and its inability to manage economic hardship at scale. The Grands. That statement went viral overseas before U.S. networks went dark. They framed it less as sympathy and more as an opportunity to expand influence, while U.S. attention turns inward. Marco cross-referenced commercial satellite telemetry and confirmed at least 3 Chinese intelligence-gathering satellites repositioned overnight to track high-bandwidth communications inside North America. That suggests surveillance, not assistance. Third is North America itself, and that's where things get complicated fast. We intercepted a Radio Canada broadcast out of Toronto about 2 hours ago, confirming that Canadian border crossings along Michigan and New York sectors are now running on controlled flow protocols. That means anyone attempting to cross into Canada gets triaged on entry. No guarantee of passage, even for U.S. citizens fleeing violence. Fuel sales on the Ontario side spiked overnight, and commercial traffic along the Ambassador Bridge between Detroit and Windsor has slowed to a crawl. Mexico's response is similar, though quieter. We picked up fragments from a Televisa signal near Monterrey, where officials confirmed National Guard units redeployed to reinforce northern crossings in Tamaulipas and Coahuila. No formal closures yet, but operators monitoring southern bands say the checkpoints are stacking vehicles 3 lanes deep on the Laredo approach. For decades, the assumption was that if things inside the U.S. cracked, people could move north or south. What we're seeing today says otherwise. It isn't just politics and borders, though. The global markets are reacting faster than governments can issue statements. Early today, Delta's Northern Relay caught bursts of CNBC Europe rebroadcasts before feeds locked. Within 12 hours of the Tier 1 zone declarations, commodity prices jumped across the board. Futures on grain shipments are spiking hard because so much of the agricultural corridor feeds through Midwest rail lines now locked behind NSRF checkpoints. Crude oil prices are climbing too, partly because refinery exports from the Gulf are routed north through these distribution hubs. I'm not an economist. But ARIA used to run logistics at a freight brokerage in Cincinnati before she started coordinating couriers, and she explained it in plain language. It's not that shelves are empty yet. It's that the world knows they're about to be. Inside the warehouse, you can feel how strange it is to talk about the world, when most of us haven't been above ground for longer than a few minutes at a time. Louis sits across from me with the Baofeng on his lap, listening to his brother's neighborhood band, or what used to be his neighborhood band before that entire East Side grid went silent yesterday afternoon. Every 30 minutes, he keys up and sends 2 short bursts, hoping someone answers. Nobody has. Meanwhile, families keep arriving. Couriers bring them in groups of 2 or 3 from back alleys and drainage exits, shuffling them into shadowed corners where they can rest, while Arya plans the next wave west. This warehouse wasn't meant for people. Its raw concrete floors, broken machinery, exposed insulation hanging like stripped cloth. But kids sleep here anyway, curled under jackets, their parents whispering into cracked flip phones that no longer connect to anyone. The strangest thing about all of it is how quiet people are. Yesterday, there was fear in every voice. Today, there's something closer to disbelief. At 1550, Kenneth patched into a broader band designed for regional coordination. It's the first time in 24 hours we've heard organized chatter beyond Dayton. On that network, you start to understand the scale. Columbus, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Louisville, Lexington, all moving families, rerouting couriers, trying to establish fallback lines when city sectors go dark. And between those bursts of information, you hear the exhaustion in people's voices, the tension of knowing they're not just hiding from a local crackdown anymore. Kenneth muted the channel at one point and said something I can't stop thinking about. This isn't about Dayton. We're sitting on the spine of the country. Everyone's fighting over who gets to control the backbone. I think he's right. If you control the Midwest corridor, you control what moves across the U.S. and what leaves it. That has global consequences, whether anyone planned for them or not. Before I close this transmission, here's what we know right now. Dayton remains under partial lockdown, but sweeps are accelerating west, and NSRF perimeter compression has reached the outer ring around Kettering and Moraine. Cincinnati, Columbus, and Indianapolis remain Tier 1 operational zones. Armed resistance reports are increasing, but communications from those cities are intermittent. Internationally, Europe is maintaining neutrality. Asia-Pacific is on alert, and Canada and Mexico are quietly tightening borders. Global shipping disruptions are already cascading into food, fuel, and medical supply networks. External satellite tracking confirms at least 5 international intelligence assets repositioned over U.S. airspace in the last 24 hours. If you're outside these zones and you're listening, don't assume this stops at city limits. This is bigger than Dayton, bigger than Ohio. It's shifting balance sheets, trade flows, and strategic power worldwide. And we're standing in the middle of it without a plan for what comes next. Stay on backup channel Sierra 39 if this band goes silent. 3 bursts for acknowledgement. This is Ethan Hale, Dayton frequency. Time is 04:20 hours. We've relocated again, this time deeper into the western industrial belt, past the skeletons of what used to be warehouses, into a machine parts depot that's been abandoned since 14. The walls are lined with rusting conveyor belts and toppled racks of unshipped engine blocks. It smells like oil soaked into concrete, dust, and mildew. No windows, thick steel walls, good for hiding from drones. That's what passes for safety now. I said yesterday the city felt different in daylight. Now, just before dawn, it feels stranger than ever. The silence is heavier. Outside, there are no sirens anymore. No scattered shouting, no distant traffic hum. Just the low vibration of UAVs somewhere high above, and the occasional hollow thud of something heavy moving through streets I can't see. And yet, somehow, this isn't just about force anymore. It's about division. In the last 12 hours, the NSRF shifted tactics in a way that feels deliberate. We intercepted an encrypted packet at roughly 2300 hours last night, labeled Civic Prioritization Protocol. Marco decrypted fragments, and here's what we learned. Federal channels are broadcasting targeted alerts into Tier 1 zones, encouraging citizens to report hoarding activity, suspicious gatherings, and resource manipulation. They're framing this as neighbor-on-neighbor enforcement, incentivizing compliance through access to restored utilities and priority relief. In plain English, they're telling people that if you turn on your neighbor, maybe your block gets power back first. And it's working. Marco pulled 3 separate intercepted bands, showing calls from civilians, voluntarily giving up storage locations, emergency caches, even names of organizers moving insulin to East Dayton shelters. Arya says this isn't new. It's the oldest play in the book. Make people desperate enough, and they'll fight each other instead of the ones pulling strings above them. But hearing it happen in real time is something else. Yesterday, 2 families who'd been moving west through the tunnels with us suddenly split off, refusing to share routing information, convinced the couriers were steering them toward an ambush. They left in silence, faces set and hard, carrying everything they owned in 2 battered duffels. This morning, we found out why. NSRF drones traced their heat signatures 3 blocks west and dropped sonic dispersers on their exit point. They didn't stand a chance. Divide and contain. That's the pattern. And if enough people buy into it, resistance dies without a single shot fired. But not everyone's breaking. Some groups are getting smarter, faster, and bolder. At roughly 0230 this morning, Kenneth relayed confirmation from Delta 17. A coordinated courier cell intercepted a 6-vehicle NSRF convoy moving north from I-70 toward the Webster rail yards. We don't know yet how they managed it, but early reports suggest they jammed the convoy's comms, using a repurposed broadcast repeater, forcing their drones to switch to manual control. In that brief delay, resistance teams moved from 2 flanks, trapping the column in a narrow bottleneck under the Ridge Avenue overpass. The engagement lasted less than 6 minutes. No heavy ordnance, no explosives, just precision, planning, and timing. 3 vehicles were seized intact. 1 supply truck carrying rations and portable power units, a lightly armored troop carrier, and, most critical, a mobile comms array equipped with encrypted NSRF bands and high-gain uplink capability. For the first time since this started, the resistance has captured the tools to fight back. Arya's been pacing since the news came through, not out of celebration, but calculation. She knows the NSRF response will be fast, overwhelming, and brutal. A convoy doesn't just disappear without triggers firing somewhere up the chain of command. Those captured vehicles are already tagged by asset numbers. The second they show up on any unauthorized band, counterforce units will descend. The couriers know this too, but for the moment, they're risking it anyway. 30 minutes ago, Marco intercepted a signal burst, routed through one of those seized uplinks. It wasn't resistance chatter, it was a clean feed directly into the NSRF's tactical grid. For about 90 seconds, we saw what they see. Drone telemetry, showing live thermal overlays of Dayton's west side. Asset locations mapped in 3 dimensions, color-coded by sector control. Red nodes flagged as civilian anomalous activity, yellow vectors marking sweep paths scheduled for the next 6 hours. Marco saved what he could before the uplink dropped. That data is everything right now. If we can stay ahead of sweep patterns even by 30 minutes, we can reroute families before the drones close their loops. But if NSRF figures out someone's inside their network, they'll burn every block until they find us. We're also hearing chatter from outside Dayton. A Columbus relay confirmed last night's seizure of Rickenbacker International, but added one detail they didn't broadcast. Resistance teams there managed to destroy one of the forward radar stations, controlling the airport's perimeter feeds. That slowed NSRF's lockout timing by an estimated 20 minutes. In Cincinnati, a small crew calling themselves Brass Line 4 disabled a highway checkpoint on the Brent Spence Bridge by luring 2 patrol drones into signal traps built from garage door opener chips and repurposed RF dampeners. These aren't soldiers doing this. These are warehouse clerks, machine techs, former EMTs, long-haul drivers, people like us. That matters. But here's the problem. No matter how many small wins the resistance manages, the information war is the real battlefield. Since last night, local NSRF command centers have been flooding public bands with deliberately conflicting updates. 0, 5, announcing fake safe corridors into blocked sectors, claiming courier networks are hoarding food caches for themselves, broadcasting warnings that resistance groups are stealing medical shipments meant for children. This isn't sloppy coordination. It's calculated chaos. If they can convince civilians that couriers are the threat, it splits the population without having to engage everyone directly. And you can hear the cracks forming already. Families argue in whispered tones over whether to trust couriers. People hesitate when offered help. In 2 sectors, Marco's scanner picked up actual civilians blocking alleys with parked cars to stop others from passing, thinking they were smuggling resources. Every minute we waste convincing people we're not their enemy gives NSRF more time to seal the noose. Luis hasn't said much tonight. He's hunched near the loading bay door, hand resting on the baofeng, tuning bands that used to be alive with chatter from his brother's street. Nothing comes back but static. When I asked if he wanted to step away, he shook his head and said, "If they're trying to make us turn on each other, I'm not giving them what they want." That's what this whole night feels like. One side fighting with rifles, the other fighting with silence, and everyone in between trying not to choose the wrong one. Kenneth says we've got until first light before NSRF runs active urban sweeps through this sector. He wants us offline before then. Arya disagrees. She says every minute we stay connected now, passing along captured telemetry data, saves someone else moving in shadows we can't see. The argument's still happening as I talk to you, and the weight of both choices is crushing everyone in this room. So here's where we stand right now. NSRF has begun psychological operations inside Tier 1 zones, pushing neighbor-on-neighbor reporting to fracture local trust. A resistance cell captured an NSRF convoy intact, seizing supply trucks, a troop carrier, and an encrypted comms uplink. That uplink gave us our first glimpse of NSRF's live drone and sweep patterns. But exposure risks counterstrikes at any moment. Chatter confirms similar small resistance actions in Columbus and Cincinnati, disrupting critical checkpoints and delaying lockouts. At the same time, deliberate misinformation campaigns are painting couriers as resource thieves to turn civilians against us. If you're listening outside these zones, understand this. The fight isn't just force on force. It's narrative against narrative. The more they convince us to distrust each other, the fewer resources we have left to resist together. If this frequency goes dead, we'll shift to Sierra 3-9. Listen for 3 short bursts, then silence. Don't answer unless you're encrypted. This is Ethan Hale, Dayton frequency. Time is 1100 hours, day 3. We've relocated again, farther west, deeper into the old industrial grid, operating out of a half-collapsed distribution center near James H. McGee Boulevard. The walls are cracked, the skylights shattered, but we've got 2 floors of concrete between us and drone surveillance. The NSRF sweeps have pushed past Kettering and Moraine now, and most of the open streets are either barricaded or burned. The map on Arya's table has more red markers than green. Something changed overnight, and it isn't just military pressure. It's the economy. Whatever fragile stability existed 2 days ago is gone. Delta 17's operators intercepted scattered fragments from outside channels, and multiple foreign markets are reporting U.S. currency devaluation, cascading into real-time collapse. That means the dollars in people's pockets are worth less every hour, and that reality is reaching the streets faster than anyone expected. By sunrise, gas stations across Montgomery County stopped accepting cash entirely. One operator on Salem Avenue said he watched 2 men pound on the bulletproof glass of a speedway, while the clerk inside shouted back through the intercom, "Fuel's barter only now. Don't bother waiving bills." When people asked what barter meant, he listed them off: batteries, antibiotics, canned goods, ammunition, and metals. Gold and silver coins are back in circulation, pulled from drawers and jewelry boxes. It sounds impossible until you see it happening in front of you. Marco caught 2 couriers trading 1 gold half-ounce coin for 10 gallons of diesel siphoned from an abandoned landscaping truck behind a hardware store. That isn't panic pricing. That's the beginning of a parallel economy replacing the one collapsing in real time. It's not just fuel. Food systems are breaking down, and no one's pretending otherwise anymore. The grocery distribution network serving Southwest Ohio has been frozen since day one, when the NSRF seized freight lanes leading out of the Webster rail yards. We intercepted a private logistics broadcast out of Chicago last night. Ryder, DHL, and XPO suspended operations indefinitely in every Tier 1 city. That means no resupply, no incoming stock, no deliveries to big box chains or local markets. By this morning, people were lined up outside smaller bodegas, bakeries, and corner shops, hoping for whatever's left. A guy named Jalen, one of our West Side operators, reported watching a group of 10 people walking block to block, knocking on storefront doors with whatever they could carry. Old silver coins, camping stoves, bicycle tires, rolls of electrical wire. Everyone's looking for the same three things: calories, medicine, and fuel. The fear isn't just hunger, it's permanence. Hospitals are collapsing even faster than grocery shelves. We've had courier reports from Miami Valley, Grandview, and Good Samaritan's emergency centers, and they all paint the same picture. ICU wards are running on generator power, and portable oxygen tanks are being rationed to critical patients only. Nurses are tearing labels off antibiotic vials and splitting single doses between 2 or 3 people when they can. At Grandview, ARIA intercepted a call from an ER tech begging anyone with sealed saline bags to drop them off anonymously at the ambulance bay doors. We passed that message through the network, but there aren't enough supplies to cover the demand. The last delivery of pharmaceuticals into Dayton came 6 days ago, and the trucks carrying those pallets are either locked behind federal seizure or missing entirely. Luis overheard one nurse on a handheld scanner say she watched a diabetic patient die in triage yesterday because their insulin cache spoiled when refrigeration failed. That wasn't an isolated case. It's happening block by block now. When desperation spreads, people start improvising ways to survive. In the last 24 hours, at least 6 barter exchanges have appeared across Dayton's west side sectors. We've confirmed 3 of them. One near an abandoned bowling alley off West 3rd, run by volunteers trading canned goods for over-the-counter meds and bottled water. Another in an old parking garage on Albany Street, where mechanics are trading fuel siphoned from junked vehicles in exchange for portable generators, propane, and solar panels. A third near the old Wolf Creek Branch Library, where couriers broker trades for antibiotics, IV kits, and glucose monitors. The rules at these exchanges aren't official, but everyone knows them. Metals, meds, or fuel get you in the door. Paper money doesn't. Marco says we're watching the early stages of what economists call asset-driven collapse, where trust in currency evaporates before the systems replacing it stabilize. But for people in these streets, the words are simpler: trade or starve. Outside Dayton, the pattern's repeating fast. A Cincinnati operator sent through a packet just after 0900 hours. Hyde Park Kroger's completely stripped bare, parking lot abandoned except for 2 armored NSRF vehicles, holding position near the loading docks. Columbus relays are reporting food banks emptied in less than an hour, and Indianapolis operators confirm 3 hospital triage tents closed overnight because they ran out of antibiotics and pain meds entirely. That collapse is forcing improvisation at every level. Small resistance crews are trading water purification tablets for used batteries. Families are swapping jewelry for bags of rice. Some neighborhoods are pooling resources under watch rotations, creating block-level barter circles, where one person trades medical supplies, another brings preserved food, and someone else secures fuel or potable water. It's fragile, though. Without trust, those circles collapse fast, and NSRF's information campaigns are making that harder by the hour. We've been tracking a deliberate strategy coming out of NSRF's local command, pitting civilians against each other, while the real choke points stay untouched. They're flooding neighborhood networks with messages, encouraging people to report anyone hoarding medical assets or stockpiling fuel without registration. Kenneth showed me a message intercepted from their encrypted uplink, a reward system promising priority power restoration to cooperating households. It's working. This morning, one family showed up here looking for antibiotics. They were turned away from 3 different barter stations because a neighbor told the NSRF where they'd been hiding fuel cans under their deck. Whether or not it's true doesn't matter anymore. People are too scared to risk helping each other openly. Divide, destabilize, then control. That's the pattern repeating everywhere. But for the first time since this started, the resistance has leverage. Remember the convoy captured yesterday under the Ridge Avenue overpass? Marco says they managed to get one of the seized NSRF troop carriers running, patched into the mobile comms array, and disguised it as an active vehicle broadcasting federal clearance codes. Using it, they infiltrated an unsecured supply checkpoint near Moraine, diverted 2 pallets of ration packs, and exfiltrated before the NSRF realized the asset tags were fake. The food's being distributed west, block by block, using couriers who shift handoffs constantly to stay off sweep paths. That single strike saved at least 3 shelter clusters we've been tracking since last night. Arya says it's proof that improvisation works if you move faster than the system's trying to control you. But she also warned us not to get comfortable. The next time NSRF realizes someone's spoofing their ID protocols, the response won't just be tightened security, it'll be kinetic. That's their word, not mine. Inside this warehouse, the tension hangs heavy, thicker than the dust in the air. Kenneth's marking red circles on Arya's map for every confirmed urban sweep pattern. Marco's hunched over his laptop, parsing captured telemetry, muttering to himself while rerouting packets through 2 encrypted tunnels and 1 unsecured international relay. Louis still hasn't heard a word from his brother. And families keep arriving in 1s and 2s, faces hollowed by exhaustion, carrying sacks of batteries, bits of silver, sealed vitamin bottles, N9, whatever passes for trade now. It doesn't feel like living anymore. It feels like negotiating your way through each hour, deal by deal, trying to hold on to something while everything else breaks around you. Before I close this transmission, here's where things stand right now. U.S. Currency value is plummeting fast. Barter economies based on metals, meds, and fuel are replacing cash transactions inside Tier 1 zones. Food distribution has effectively collapsed. All major freight carriers suspended operations into Dayton, Cincinnati, Columbus, and Indianapolis. Small barter stations are appearing but can't meet demand. Local hospitals are overwhelmed and critically undersupplied, with no incoming deliveries since day 1. Antibiotics, oxygen tanks, and insulin are already scarce. NSRF's information campaigns are succeeding at fracturing trust, pitting neighbors against each other and weakening courier networks. Resistance-captured assets are keeping small shelters alive, but the risk of escalation from NSRF retaliation grows by the hour. If you're outside these zones, prepare now. Store water, preserve food, secure meds where you can, and don't depend on paper currency holding value. Set up barter circles with people you trust, and verify every bit of information before acting on it. This is Ethan Hale, Dayton frequency. Time is 2200 hours, day 4. If you're hearing this, we're still alive. That's the best I can offer right now. The city above us is no longer recognizable. Streetlights haven't been lit in 3 nights. Cell towers are dead across the county. And whatever semblance of order existed on day 1 has rotted into something unrecognizable. We're broadcasting tonight from an old municipal substation south of Wolf Creek. Thick concrete walls, low ceilings, cables ripped from rusted panels, the kind of place designed to be forgotten. The resistance cells are scattered now, no longer concentrated in couriers or shelters, but splintered into fragments, acting independently. Most of us here aren't fighters. We were forklift operators, EMTs, clerks, welders, drivers. Now we're just holding signals open while the city folds around us. The economy isn't collapsing anymore. It's collapsed. Barter is the only system left inside Tier 1 zones now. Paper dollars are worth less than printer scraps, and even precious metals are starting to lose traction. People don't care about ounces or carats anymore. They care about insulin vials, sealed antibiotics, propane tanks, and shelf-stable calories. That's the new currency. We intercepted a string of encrypted NSRF packets this afternoon, confirming what Marco suspected last night. Regional supply chains are gone for the foreseeable future. Nothing moves through the rail hubs. Nothing flows in from Chicago or the Gulf. Hospitals are darkening across the state. Operating rooms shut. Dialysis patients quietly turned away. At Miami Valley Medical Center, the backup generators failed at 1500 hours today. They're triaging on stairwells now, working by flashlight. A nurse's voice broke over a civilian band an hour ago. If anyone has pediatric oxygen tanks, we don't care who you are. Just leave them outside the ambulance bay doors. Nobody answered. But what's breaking the fastest isn't food or medicine. It's trust. NSRF's strategy is everywhere now. The information war has replaced the streets. They've opened anonymous tip lines rewarding priority utilities for households reporting unauthorized gatherings, hidden caches, and even private radios. 3 different courier shelters have already been raided after neighbors turned in entry routes, trading each other's safety for a promise of heat or lights. Whether those promises are real doesn't even matter anymore. People believe them. Tonight, the same thing nearly happened here. Around 1830, an NSRF drone broke low over the warehouse we'd been using 2 blocks east, scanning windows with a thermal pod. We moved everyone fast. 57 people, families, kids, through an alley grid into the municipal tunnels. Halfway through, we heard boots pounding pavement overhead. Kenneth froze, listening. He knew that sound. Sweep teams. Not drones, not random patrols. Ground boots moving in formation. One of the families panicked and ran toward the open street. Seconds later, a neighbor 2 doors down waved his arms wildly, shouting toward the patrol to draw their attention. He thought we were smuggling weapons. I watched his face in the dim light. Scared, apologetic, but certain he was choosing survival over solidarity. Divide, destabilize, control. It's working. But resistance isn't dead yet. At 1910 tonight, operators from Delta 17 launched their largest coordinated strike so far, using the captured NSRF convoy we mentioned yesterday. That armored troop carrier, running disguised with active clearance tags, rolled point on a diversion through 3rd Street, while 3 courier teams flanked from alleys. For 8 minutes, it worked. They disabled 2 MRAPs blocking the highway ramps and rerouted a food shipment headed for federal seizure. For the first time in 4 days, someone else controlled the streets, even if just briefly. The convoy returned fire from a captured mobile turret mounted on the troop carrier, pushing sweep units back into a secured sector near Deeds Point Metro Park. But NSRF countered faster than anyone expected. Mid-altitude blackjack UAVs deployed chemical dispersers across the entire 3rd Street corridor, neutralizing the strike within minutes. All we've confirmed is that the convoy didn't make it back. 3 operators' signals are dark. Delta 17's frequency hasn't transmitted since 1952. Aria won't say it, but we all feel it. That was our boldest move, and it may have cost us everything. Marco hasn't spoken in an hour. He's been staring at his laptop, parsing telemetry packets with his headphones on, scanning for any signal from the captured NSRF uplink. At 2000 hours, something strange broke through. A burst from a military-grade encrypted channel flagged external origin. It wasn't ours. For 12 seconds, we watched a string of coordinates stream across the screen, followed by a compressed data block too dense to crack without risking exposure. Kenneth says it looked like satellite asset positioning. Aria thinks it came from outside US networks entirely. No one knows who sent it or why, but Marco caught one English phrase embedded in metadata: Pacific Grid Access. We're guessing it came from an allied intelligence relay. Maybe a friendly operator intercepting NSRF communications. Maybe something else. But that's the problem with fragments like this. The less you know, the more your imagination fills in the gaps. And right now, everyone here is imagining different things. Luis has barely moved all day. He sits by the transceiver with his Baofeng in his lap, watching static on the channel that used to hold his brother's street net. He still sends 3 short bursts every hour, hoping someone answers. Tonight, as we moved west through the industrial corridor, he stopped in the middle of an overpass and stared down at the city. No fires, no lights, just quiet blocks under shifting UAV shadows. he whispered, barely loud enough for me to hear. I don't know who's winning anymore. I didn't answer because I don't either. The barter networks are straining to breaking point. This morning, a gold coin bought 10 gallons of diesel. By tonight, it won't even buy 2. Shelves are stripped, gas siphoned, water filters exhausted. People are trading wedding rings for bags of beans and homemade antibiotics made in improvised distilleries. The rules keep shifting daily because everything we once anchored to, power, currency, supply, stability, has disintegrated. And now the rumors are starting. Someone intercepted a whisper band conversation claiming NSRF command plans to divide Dayton permanently into sealed sectors. Others believe captured telemetry shows an incoming surge of federal reinforcements from outside Ohio entirely. And then there's the strangest report. Marco caught a foreign packet bounce on an unsecured spectrum out of Quebec, cross-linked with encrypted GPS overlays showing Dayton mapped in 4 different colors, each tagged with competing control signatures. If that's true, this isn't just rebellion versus authority anymore. There are more hands on the board than anyone realizes. We're down to 1 working repeater, 2 car batteries, and half a gallon of water between everyone in this room. Kenneth says we should fall back farther west, into abandoned farmlands where drone coverage thins and bypass routes still exist. Aria wants to stay in the city, keep the network alive as long as possible. Keep relaying updates for families trapped behind NSRF cordons. I keep switching between wanting to run and refusing to leave the people still listening. Because if this frequency dies, if these warnings stop, hundreds more will walk blindly into sweeps they can't see coming. Maybe that's why I keep talking, even when my voice feels like static in my own ears. Before I close this, here's what I can give you right now. Barter economies have fully replaced currency in Dayton, Columbus, Cincinnati, and Indianapolis. Food, fuel, and medicine are the only assets that matter now. NSRF launched its largest offensive yet tonight, neutralizing the captured convoy after an 8-minute engagement. Multiple resistance operators are missing. Foreign packets are bleeding into U.S. military bands, suggesting outside surveillance or covert interference, though intent remains unclear. Hospitals across Tier 1 zones are on the brink of full collapse. Mobile triage units are forming in libraries, gyms, and abandoned parking lots. Civilian trust continues to disintegrate, as NSRF leverages division tactics to turn neighbors into informants. If you're listening outside these zones, don't assume distance protects you. The choke points are spreading beyond Ohio. If markets collapse fully, you'll see shortages everywhere, not just here. Stay prepared. Build small local barter circles now. Trade what you can, trust who you must, and keep your radios live but quiet. We'll keep this frequency running until power fails or we move again. If the band goes silent, switch to backup Sierra 39 and listen for 3 short bursts. Don't transmit unless you have encryption. This is Ethan Hale, Dayton Frequency. If this is the last signal you hear from me, hold your ground.